Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, October 10th, 2013. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. In our third hour, at the top of the hour, Kevin Barrett is going to be joining us to talk about his new book, Dynamic Duo. And at the bottom of the third hour, we are scheduled to talk to Zeeta Andrews, who's one of the organizers of this truckers convoy into Washington, D.C. She's going to be on the road, so based on cell coverage, it's a little up in the air, but she's agreed to come on and basically talk about what's going on and all of the propaganda and fraud and hoaxing that is being put out by the government to try and keep this thing from happening. And it looks, again, the public is aware the dirty tricks are going on, and it is starting to backflash on them. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny's in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in with your concerns. And I'm going to take some stuff out of sequence because there's so much going on that I'm not getting to some issues we need to get back to. And so I want to start the top of the show with this horrendous blizzard that just ran through South Dakota. It set an all-time record for snowfall. They got as much snow in just 3 days as they normally get for the entire month of October. There's something like 77,000 dead cattle that just froze to death in this sudden blizzard. Major parts of the states is still without power. People are stranded. It's just a complete disaster over there. And interestingly enough, the corporate media doesn't seem to feel this is a national news story. And I actually was in contact with a CBS producer asking why this was not national news. And he said, our local affiliates are in North Dakota. They're covering it. It's not really national news. And that's weird because only 2 weeks ago, CBS and every other network was treating as national news this new report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that even as it admitted there has been no actual warming of the globe over the last 16 years, still insisted it's out there. The heat is hiding in the deep ocean. It's hiding under the ice at Antarctica. The world is getting warmer, and it's the fault of all you icky-poo human beings. You must buy carbon credits. You must pay carbon taxes, and so forth and so on. And they were raising on a busted flush because my analysis was a little different. I understand, and you understand, that solar activity is the dominant control of climate on Earth. And the way the IPCC set up all these scientific operations to prove human-caused global warming, they said, don't take any other factors into consideration. Assume a static world with no other outside influences and document how human activity would cause the temperature to go up. So they got their desired result here. But the real world doesn't work like that. There are all the factors going on out there. And I'm not selling you carbon credits or any other silliness here. Given that solar activity is now at a 100-year low, looks like we're going into a new Maunder minimum, I warned we were facing yet another hard winter, and boy, it sure didn't take very long for that forecast to be proven correct. You think the corporate media is going to admit they were wrong supporting the carbonazis, or even worse, that the independent media was actually right? So, of course, this South Dakota blizzard isn't getting any coverage. Now there's snow warnings in Nevada. Mount Charleston is under snow alert here right now. All righty, we're going to take a quick phone call real quick. Wes in New York. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, aloha, Mike. I just want to say I really appreciate the show that you do. And I have a hard time believing that I'm the first one to come up with this idea. But I thought, how awesome would it be if we had a constitutional amendment that required all members of the Senate and the House of Representatives to convert and maintain, upon election, all of their respective financial investments into U.S. Treasuries.
Well, you're not the first person to suggest that all elected and appointed officers have their wealth in a blind trust. But I do like the idea of having it invested in treasuries. And when we talk about the blueprint for the new America, I think all government pay should be set as a fixed percentage of the median wage and salary for the entire nation. And
that's even better.
Yeah, I like that one even better. But we have to tie all of these government officials' own personal fortunes to the fortunes of the average American, not just have them accepting all these little crumbs from the 1% to make the 1% richer, because that's what gets us into fascism.
Well, I think that's the main idea, is to de-incentivize. I mean, if any elected official who's heavily invested in pharmaceuticals or oil companies, obviously they're going to be incentivized to use their votes to enrich those areas of the private sector.
Well, we certainly saw that with TARP. I mean, the public opinion was 9-1 against using public funds to save Wall Street from this mortgage-backed security fraud. But because members of Congress' own personal fortunes are invested in those Wall Street firms, they voted to save their own investment portfolios on the backs of the American people, and were laughing and cheering when they got it through.
Right, and while the government is shut down, they're all partying it up in the bars around Washington.
Yeah, those bars in Washington, D.C. are doing a land office business out there, and there's a lot of them out there. Go out to Google Maps and center it on Washington, D.C., and then do a search for liquor stores, and you will see what a party city Washington, D.C. is.
It makes me wish I was still a bartender, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
I also like the idea that Warren Buffett floated out there, that if debt to GDP exceeds 3%, no senators or members of the House of Representatives are eligible for re-election.
That would be a good idea. I remember back in the 1990s, there was actually a measure floating around the state capitals called the Ultimatum Resolution. When the federal government debt went over $6 trillion, the federal government would be dissolved, but they unfortunately were unable to get enough of the state legislatures to pass that, or the governors to sign it, because in this day and age, most state legislators and governors see their position in the state as merely a training ground for that ultimate promotion to Sodom on the Potomac.
I couldn't agree with you more. Anyway,
right.
Mike, I'm sure you've got a million things to get to. Thanks very much for taking my call, and thanks again for the show that you do. I really appreciate it.
All right, well, thank you very much. So let's get on to this ride for the Constitution. And as you probably remember, during our show yesterday, we got this amazing phone call from somebody out in Utah who found himself on the highway driving in the midst of a group of trucks with out-of-state plates and motorcycle bikers who were heading east, heading for this protest. I'm getting emails from the staging areas in the surrounding states saying they're already jam-packed full and they're ready to converge on Washington, D.C. The corporate media is absolutely ignoring this, other than obviously overt attempts to try and smear the whole thing and say, oh, it's just a bunch of conspiracy wackos, and gosh, they're truck drivers, they don't have any brains or anything like that. And by the way, I know for a fact that's not true. Because many years ago, when I was still hanging out with the Mensa organization, you'd be amazed how many truck drivers are in Mensa and have these gifted IQs, and they drive trucks because they like being their own boss, and they like seeing the scenery, and they just think it's a cool thing to do. Not everybody with a high IQ is working in a laboratory or on talk radio. And so this idea, they're trying to already character assassinate everybody that's behind that. We're getting all this stuff coming out there saying, oh, it's nonsense, you shouldn't support it. Very clearly, despite the government shutdown, the propagandists are on overtime trying to find some way to derail or dismiss or trivialize this. We can count on the corporate media to portray this in the worst light possible. And so this is a clarion call to everybody in the independent media to get out there, to document what's going on, to take pictures and videos of the trucks rolling up the highway through your neighborhood, the banners on the overpasses, and we, the independent media, have to make this a major story, because the corporate media absolutely has been given their marching orders to just make this go away. So what is it about the truckers? The corporate media is saying, oh, it's just the truckers, it's just the bikers. No, it isn't. They are representing all of us. The American people is what's going on here. They're visible, they're using that visibility, but they represent the entire American people. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And as I said before the break here, the corporate media is trying to either ignore this truckers convoy, bikers convoy, all these people converging on Washington, D.C. at the same time. They're trying to just make it go away. Or if they're noticing it, they're trying to basically portray it in the worst possible terms. They're conspiracy wackos. They're malcontents. They're commies. They're socialists. They're evil. All you have to do is look at the name. Ride for the Constitution. And how can you reasonably find fault with Americans standing up to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States of America and that Bill of Rights? That is the foundation on which this nation operates. They are the rules under which we, the people, allow this government to act as a caretaker for our nation. And if they don't want to follow those rules, there's an easy remedy. They can resign. And that's what this is about. And that's why these truckers and bikers and everybody else who's joining in on this convoy are all about reminding the government in Washington, D.C., they have to follow the rules in that Constitution, in that Bill of Rights. The First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, Ninth and Tenth Amendments, all of them. You don't get to pick and choose. You don't get to decide for us what it means. That Constitution and the Bill of Rights belongs to we the people. It says so right up at the top. It's not a list of what the government can do as much as it is a list of those things the government is prohibited from doing, but in this day and age insists on doing anyway. And that's what this is all about, restoring the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And whatever else the corporate media is going to try and tell you that this trucker and biker and impeachment strike is all about. That's what it's about. It's about reminding the federal government they're supposed to be following the instructions laid down by we the people and not play fast and loose with the rules to make themselves rich and to spy on all of us. This actually started getting organized back during that lame attempt by the government to claim that Syria's Bashar al-Assad was using chemical weapons against women and children of his own Alawite supporters. And that was a completely unsupportable claim to begin with. It made no logical sense. There was no motive. And that's when this whole group of truckers started organizing this thing. At the last count, they're estimating 10,000 trucks are going to take part. Originally, they were thinking eastern seaboard, east of the Mississippi. As we found out from that phone call yesterday, truckers are coming from all over the country here. Now, there's a very interesting story that's been floating around on how using the government shutdown as an excuse that Obama plans to deploy the National Guard to close I-495, the Beltway, around Washington, D.C. tomorrow in order to keep the truckers from reaching the downtown area and the Capitol. And this story's floating around. I cannot find any confirmation for it at all. Now, I'll tell you what this is. The same rule applies to these roads and highways that applies to the national parks and the national monuments. They are the property of the people. They don't actually cost anything to leave open. The government, because of the financial problems, may decide not to sweep up the debris and the litter during the shutdown, but it doesn't have a legal or moral authority to close the roads and take them away from we the people who own them. And in any event, do you think the truckers are just going to turn around and go home when they can use surface streets to get in there? If the White House were to actually do this, to try and literally shut down the Beltway, block off access to keep the truckers out of Washington, D.C., it will be seen by the world as a sign of fear, a sign of a government that is now terrified of its own angry population. It could also be a deliberate attempt to provoke a confrontation with the truck drivers and protesters to justify draconian military action. Oh, it's a national emergency. The truckers are in the... whatever. Now, as I said, I'm unable to find any confirmation this is really being done. I think it's a trial balloon to see what public reaction is going to be. I know over at Prison Planet, Alex Jones is claiming they've got a confirmation, but what I'm hearing from organizers of the trucker convoy is that this appears to be a hoax to bluff people into going back home and not showing up at all. So my advice to the truckers is keep on going, keep on trucking. Avoid confrontation, do not resort to violence, but keep on going. Now, as we mentioned yesterday, it's a guarantee that the government has people already infiltrated into those motorcycle gangs. We're seeing all that brouhaha about that SUV driver who got beat up by the bikers, and it turned out some of the bikers were undercover cops. One of them has now been arrested and charged for taking part in the beating, rather than just standing back and saying, yeah, get the guy. It would be very easy indeed for the U.S. government to acquire a truck and put a bomb in it, to drive into Washington, D.C., set it off and say, oh, these truckers, they're terrorists. We now have to have TSA at every state border and every truck stop and so forth and so on. There's an easy way around that, and I was fortunate enough to be talking to one of the organizers the other day, in fact, earlier today, who said that the trucks are empty. They're not actually carrying cargo because they want to save as much as they can on the gas money. And I said, well, there's a very simple thing to do, and that is all the trucks should have their cargo loading doors locked open. So anybody can look inside the truck and see that it is empty. And if there is a truck with a bomb inside by the FBI or CIA or somebody else, the fact that its doors are closed will stick out like a sore thumb. And apparently this idea was well received and is already percolating upward through the rank and file of this whole protest. So this thing is going ahead, and again, the corporate media will attempt to dismiss this, trivialize it, marginalize it, make it go away. It is up to we in the independent media to keep the focus on this. Because right now, at this point in history, the most important thing you can all do is to get out there and be visible. Even if it means just putting a sign in your front window or in your place of business, I support the Truckers' Ride for the Constitution. It's to get the message out there, not only to your fellow Americans, but to the rest of planet Earth. We, the people of the United States of America, do not support this government and its actions. We, the people of the United States of America, refuse to be the wallets of last resort for Wall Street's crimes and corruptions. We, the people of the United States of America, know this government is telling lies to justify wars of conquest. We are not a part of it. We will not go along with it. History will not collectively demonize all of the American people for the crimes of a very few money junkies and their wholly owned Congress critters. And that's why it's so important to get out there over the weekend. Have a protest in your local neighborhood. Just be visible to the world. All righty. Now then, getting back to the shutdown, and they're still going back and forth about that, and more it is very obvious that this so-called shutdown hasn't really shut down the government at all. All the things that we hate about it are still perfectly funded and moving forward. The war machine's still moving forward. NSA is still spying on us and the rest of it. But they're continuing to try and make a big deal about shutting down the parks, the monuments, and now ostensibly the highways, to coerce us into agreeing to allow our future generations to be saddled with ever higher amounts of debt to get back those things which are already our property. It's an extortion racket. We have taken away from you your public lands and monuments and highways, and you won't get them back until you agree to give us an ever bigger piece of the action for the future. They're operating like the mafia out there. And apparently the National Park Service has been removing handles from drinking fountains along hiker trails to hammer home that point, to increase the pain. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show, and we have another update on this story about the potential closure of the D.C. Beltway, and it's looking more and more like this is just another dirty trick played by the government to try and keep you, the serf, back in your homes, silent, quiet, out of view of the rest of the world, because apparently somebody contacted the head of the Virginia National Guard, who has stated there are no orders or preparations for the National Guard to close down the Beltway. The story is a complete propaganda hoax. How much longer are you going to just sit there living under a government that lies to you about everything until you just get angry about being lied to about everything? We, the people of the United States of America, are the most lied to people on the face of the earth, and it has got to stop. I will have a truthful government, or I will have no government at all. You want a zero-tolerance policy? There it is. You lie, you're gone. The Constitution does not authorize the government to lie or propagandize the American people. So when they do it, whether it's about closing the Beltway, Assad gassing his own people, Saddam having nuclear weapons, this government delegitimizes itself because it's acting outside the limits of the Constitution, and it is breaking the contract between we the people and that government. It certainly shows a complete lack of respect for the American people, for this government to go on just thinking they can make up any big steaming pile of bovine excrement and use a snowblower to shovel it at us, and we're supposed to sit here and out of a false sense of patriotism accept what we're being told and believe it? Prudence demands everything coming out of the corporate media, and apparently that now includes Prison Planet, and this government be looked at with a huge dose of skepticism. We're going to go to the phones here. Joe in Brooklyn. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How are you? Aloha, Mike.
Aloha. You're on the air.
Hey, yeah, actually, what would actually bring down these government lies is actually you worked with NASA in the 70s, and the program, the Viking program, and the moon landing hoax has been exposed in Europe. And
no, it hasn't. No, it hasn't. Thank you very much. All right, we're going to let him go. I was expecting that. It's just another dirty trick to try and kookify the independent media. Oh, the Apollo moon landings were faked. No, they weren't. The Apollo moon landings took place back when this nation could actually achieve technological marvels. Back when this nation was still in love with the idea of the future and excelling in scientific achievement. Now, when I was with NASA, I worked on Viking and Voyager and post-mission analysis on Apollo 12. I actually got to work with those bits of Surveyor 3 that were brought back from the moon. And all of those Apollo landing sites left in place these little corner cube reflectors. They're sort of high-tech versions of highway signs and the taillights on your car, called the laser ranging retroreflectors, the LRRRs. And they are still there, and they are still being used. And with the advances in technology, they can now be used by serious amateur astronomers with contemporary equipment. By the way, a couple of things you need to remember. Mythbusters has already done this, where they went to an observatory and they fired a laser and they got a signal back from the laser-ranging retroreflectors. I've done that experiment myself back when I was at the Table Mountain Observatory. Besides which, we now have all these other probes from other nations that are orbiting the moon and have imaged directly the Apollo landing sites. And you can still see the bottom half of the LEM, the little lunar rovers, and with the exception of the Apollo 11 site, the flags are still standing. Now, do you think these foreign governments are part of this thing to hoax the American? It's nonsense. But this kind of stuff that's put out there about phony Apollo moon landings and chemtrails and HAARP and no plane at the Pentagon are a classic and well-worn propaganda tactic called poisoning the well. When somebody starts talking about something the government wants to shut down, they will hire people who couldn't get a job at McDonald's to basically call into talk shows or prowl the blogs and put complete nonsense out there. So the corporate media can say, oh, you don't want to go look at the independent media. Look at the kooky things they're talking about. But we know that's what they do. And that's why it doesn't work any longer. We'll probably get calls about Bigfoot and Elvis Lovechild in our second hour or something like that. All righty, let's see. Now, regarding the brouhaha over the national monuments and potentially the highway, although that story now appears to be a complete hoax, when those veterans cross those barricades into their own memorial, that is a legitimate form of protest against the government exceeding its authority. It is protected under the First Amendment. So when you go out into your national parks, your monuments, your highways, and you go past those government barricades, it is a legitimate form of protest against a government that does not have a legal right to withhold from you your public lands. And it's protected under the First Amendment. Now, this government won't really care. Their job is to inflict pain, to drive you back into your slave pens, to drive you back into not questioning the wisdom of private central banking, issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, to get you to not stand up to your betters, or whatever rationale they're using in Washington, D.C. Oh, those American people, they're getting uppity. They actually think they're supposed to have something to say about this country. But every time you stand up to the government, anywhere, it's covered by the First Amendment. And a lot of confusion comes out of the First Amendment. You hear a lot of talk about, oh, First Amendment protects exotic dancers and canvases in museums with bovine poo glued to them. And yes, it does, but the purpose of the First Amendment was to give to every single American the right to stand up to the government and say, you are wrong, without fear of repercussion. Which brings me to the story about the actor James Woods, who went public yesterday on a story that was covered in the Hollywood press about how because of his outspoken political views, his career is pretty much over. Not that he needs to worry about it. He's got a ton of money. And all I could say to that is, welcome to my world, James. But I was very encouraged by all the comments that were on that story over at the Hollywood Reporter, where they were siding with James and saying yes, because even movie stars and anonymous production crew should have a right to express their concern about the politics of the United States without fear of repercussion, whether it's from the government itself or all those government mockingbird COINTELPRO lackeys who have infiltrated the film industry to try and make sure that it only makes movies that serve the U.S. government agenda. And there's nothing new about that. Charlie Chaplin ultimately lost his citizenship because J. Edgar Hoover kept telling him, you've got to make movies that show police officers and government people as swell Joes and not oafish buffoons. And Chaplin said, I'm not going to do that. My audience pays to see these government authority figures made fun of. And ultimately Hoover, who absolutely was convinced that the movie industry should be working as the U.S. government's propaganda arm, succeeded in having Chaplin's citizenship withdrawn. And we've seen more recently people like Charlie Sheen, who gets out there saying, I think there are questions about 9/11. Boom, his career is destroyed. Rosie O'Donnell was kicked off The View for expressing questions about the official story of 9/11. And if we make a big stink about it, anytime anybody in the film industry expresses an opinion and it gets blacklisted, if we make a big stink about that, we might encourage Hollywood to remember that even movie stars have First Amendment rights to say what is on their mind as private citizens without getting hammered, without having their careers destroyed. And, of course, the best-known case of that back in the 1960s was actress Jean Seberg, who was supporting the civil rights movement at a time when the civil rights movement was pointing out the inequities of the Vietnam draft. And so the FBI, Jean Seberg was pregnant. The FBI planted a story in the Los Angeles Times that she was pregnant by one of the Black Panthers. And even though the 60s were all about freedom of love and everything, interracial sex, especially if you're married, was a tacky no-no, and they wrecked her career. And ultimately she committed suicide. And because her husband was a French diplomat and threatened to make it an international scandal, for once in its very long career, the FBI did admit playing that dirty trick on Jean Seberg, and they apologized and said, we promise we won't ever do it again, which of course was another one of their lies. But it's all about that First Amendment. Use it or lose it. Whether it's James Woods expressing his honest opinion, or whether it's the World War II veterans retaking their own memorial, or whether it's you, the American people, going out to your national parks and hiking trails without restraint. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And in a way, I'm almost feeling sorry for the corporate media because without all the government propagandists sending them press releases because of the shutdown, and they don't want to talk about that South Dakota snowstorm. They don't want to talk about all the problems with Obamacare, which we are going to get into very shortly. They're kind of desperate for anything to fill the airwaves with, and I was noticing during the commercial break, Fox News was running a story about handy little gadgets to make it easier for you to take naps. Talk about fluff. Absolute fluff. Product placement. Who knows? Maybe they got paid by the guy to turn it into a news story. And there's nothing new about that. A lot of what passes for news are, in fact, paid for press releases by companies who will go out to a video facility and they will produce a tape about what they're doing that looks like a news report. And they'll go over to the TV station and say, here's some money, here's the tape, and the news program will run it as straight news, which may be what's happening here. Now then, somebody just sent me a link. CNN is even now still pushing out this story, how climate change to drive annual temps to new highs within a generation, according to this scientific report that was paid for with tons and tons of Al Gore's money. And again, tell that to those poor people in South Dakota who just got hit with an all-time record snowfall. They got in a space of 3 days as much snow as they get in the entire month of October. And those carbon Nazis are still out there. They're still trying. You've got to buy carbon credits. You've got to pay carbon taxes. We're desperate for your money. And no, it's not actually going to stop global warming because there's no global warming. But you should believe what we tell you because we are the corporate media and the government. And you should never question the corporate media and the government or the terrorists will win or something like that. Now, getting back to the shutdown and what is and is not in operation, President Obama has been exercising a great deal of latitude in deciding what will be shut down. Your national parks are shut down. His golf course at Andrews Air Force Base is still open. And it turns out he doesn't actually have the authority to do that. Because apparently there is a very old law in this country called the Anti-Deficiency Act. It's 143 years old. And it states, in order to prevent government borrowing past congressionally set limits, this is what will get shut down in what order. And at the top of the list does include support services for the national parks, but does not allow the parks themselves to be shut down. So Obama going out there and picking and choosing, he's already in violation of U.S. law on that one. Now, let's talk a little bit about the economy, which is really what everybody should be talking about. And yes, the plunge protection team was back at it today. The American stock market is soaring. I'm not sure on what, but the Dow is up 230 at the moment. They may be anticipating a deal will be made on the budget impasse, and we know Boehner is floating what they're calling the short-term solution, a temporary increase in the debt ceiling to get over the crunch. There's only one problem with that. They did that last January. Oh, it's a temporary lift of the debt ceiling. And, of course, temporary became permanent. Just like back in 1971 when Richard Nixon temporarily ended gold convertibility of the U.S. dollar, and that became permanent policy. They're just trying to get this past you any way that they can. Now, China is now starting to hedge against the possibility of a U.S. default. They're setting up financial buffers against a default. They're already building up a firewall to make sure that when the U.S. defaults, the repercussions don't reach their country. And I'm sure probably every other financial center on planet Earth is doing that right now. They're delinking. Now, about Obamacare, it just gets worse and worse. And this is why Fox News is reporting on devices to help you take naps. Apparently, the Obamacare site set out a massive reset on all passwords because of system problems. Everybody was notified you have to reset your password. If you set up an account and it did not make it all the way through to the central database, which is the vast majority of them, you have to start the enrollment process all over again. And here's the wrinkle. You have to use a new username because the one you used before is still in the system and they can't take it out. It's stuck in authentication limbo. So they're basically trying... and here in Hawaii, it gets even worse. We've been seeing the commercials, Hawaii Health Exchange, blah, blah, blah. And the commercials were really running last night. It was very obvious they're spending a fortune trying to get people to sign up. And it turns out here in Hawaii, they have had to completely reset from the beginning the Obamacare exchange because not one of the enrollments actually got through to any of the health insurance providers. It just vanished. So they just hit the reset button, formatted the data drives, and said, all right, everybody's got to sign in again. We'll get this working sooner or later. And worse, as people go through the enrollment and they look at how this massive database for your health care is being shared and integrated with other systems, sort of a carry forward of that whole Promise software that related data from multiple databases. It basically is going to allow the government to link your IP address with your name, your social security number, your bank accounts, and your web surfing habits. Some of them are asking for validation of a credit rating, which they're not supposed to because this is supposed to be health care for everybody. John McAfee was out there saying this is a hacker's wet dream. And this system is so flawed, I mean, if they can't even get it to work correctly, they're not even paying attention to the security holes. This is just a complete, unmitigated disaster. And apparently, the IP that you put into or is recorded by the Obamacare website then goes over to the NSA to see if you're looking at porn sites or gambling sites or all that other stuff, because, of course, all of this stuff may adversely affect your health condition and justify the increasing of those health care premiums. Now, I've been talking about this software system, this Charlie Foxtrot, costing $88 million over 3 years. It turns out $88 million was the initial bid that won these people the contract. But there have been cost overruns, and part of this was run on cost plus. It's typical for a government operation, and it turns out the entire actual cost to date for healthcare.gov is $634 million, and it does not work. It's not even a year away from launch. Now, one more thing, and I know we got a caller waiting on the line. I got some email from people living outside the United States of America, and in point of fact, Americans living in foreign countries are not subject to Obamacare because it is presumed that where they are living, they have compliant health care coverage. So if you're an American living outside the United States of America, good reason to move. Obamacare is not impacting you, or at least that's what I'm being told. Scott in Wisconsin, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. You know, when you were, how you doing, brother? Aloha.
Aloha.
You know, yesterday, Mike, I was getting prepared for, like you were saying, for the bad winter coming, and look at what happened. You were talking about earlier out there in the Dakotas. Mike, you ain't gonna believe this. I'm gonna make you laugh. Yesterday, I got two hurricane lanterns. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went on my expedition to find an oil. And so I went out to Menards, and I said, "You guys got any oil for lanterns?" And they said, "Well, we have it out in our back where the garden stuff is." So I went back there and I asked the lady, "You got any oil for lanterns, hurricane lanterns?" She goes, "Well, I don't know. We might be out." So she took me back there, and she goes, "Well, here's tiki." I don't know if you're familiar with that oil. But I go, here's two things. So I picked them up, and I said, "Well, will this work for a lantern?" And she said, "Yeah."
I know where this is going. Scott, we got to take a break for Phyllis Shapley and commercials. Do not hang up. I want to come back to this story after this break, okay? So stick with me, Scott. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Scott in Wisconsin about his adventures with hurricane lamps. And I think this is a good topic for us to cover, as we are obviously going into a very brutal winter. We know that due to neglect, not trimming back the tree limbs, there are going to be a lot of power outages, and you should be prepared to deal with that. Candles are always good to have. Now, a lot of the hurricane lamps you see in the stores today are not really hurricane lamps. I'm old enough. I've actually gone through a hurricane in New Hampshire, and a hurricane lamp, as it was originally envisioned, is very heavy, so it cannot blow over from wind coming through cracks in the walls and windows and so forth. What they call hurricane lamps today are very thin glass, and they're very fragile and therefore very, very dangerous. But when they talk about lamp oil, what they're usually talking about are those little tiny bottles of oil that have a scent in there, like rose or sandalwood or something. But if you take the scent out, it's just kerosene. So you can go over to the paint department and get a can of kerosene, and it will work just fine in your, what basically they're kerosene lanterns. Now, Scott, you were telling me that they were trying to get you to buy some of the tiki torch fuel for your kerosene lantern, and that is definitely not a good way to go, because tiki torch fuel is a blend of white gas and alcohol, and it burns at a very much higher temperature. And in these thin glass lanterns, it could actually lead to cracking not only of the chimney itself, but even of the bowl below that. So tell us how your adventure ended.
Well, Mikey, thank you, brother. I love you, man. You know, Mike, I went in there, and I thank God, like I said, I went home, and if I would have been a dummy, I would have stuck it in there, and I was planning on getting it, burning it in the house to get it prepared, you know. Well, you're right. It was for the oil was for the candles, and it said, use outdoors only. So I go, oh, my gosh, there's a lost woman. No, I'll go fast. So I called Gander Mountain, and you would think that they would have this stuff. Nope, we never have got it in, ever, and I don't think we're ever going to get it in down the road. But, Mikey, here's where I'm going to make you laugh. I called Walmart, and I got a guy, and I asked him, do you guys got any lantern oil for the lanterns, you know? You know what he told me, Mikey? He goes, we took it off the shelf for the Christmas decorations, and we won't be getting it in all the rest of the year.
Oh, my goodness.
Can you believe that, Mike?
Yeah, but
I was stunned when I heard that. He said, we took it off the shelves. And you know what? If for anything, like I did finally Ace, and I told the guy, and he laughed his head off like you. But here's the thing. Preparation, and you go out there for a simple thing like this, and you got a lady that doesn't even know what she's talking about, and then half the places don't even have the stuff. And Mike, I'll end with this. You actually need it during the wintertime if you have power outages.
Well, you should have it year-round for power outages, because you get storms in the summer, you get power outages in the summer. Now, if you have, sufficient money that you're putting into your preps, obviously the best thing to do is go out and get a Coleman lantern, and they do make them now, instead of the Coleman fuel and the pump-up thing, they make them with propane lanterns. And, of course, you need to get it, and you need to very carefully set it up with that mantle and prime it and get it used for the first time. But those are very safe and very reliable, and you can just get those propane cans anywhere. But if you have hurricane lanterns or railroad lanterns or any kind of lanterns, forget about finding those little tiny bottles of lamp oil with sweet-smelling stuff in there. It's just kerosene, and you can find gallons of kerosene over in the paint section at your local hardware store. Okay? Scott, I'm going to let you go here because we got a lot of stuff to talk about. We got some people coming on in the third hour. We need to sort of clear the decks for. Interesting little story. This is being reported in the British media, but not here in the United States of America. It's a story about a lady named Lynn Spalding, 57 years old, went missing from her room at the San Francisco General Hospital 17 days ago after being admitted with an infection. Nobody could find her. The family filed a missing persons report. They conducted what they said was a search of the hospital. 17 days ago, could not find her. Tuesday, they found her body in a stairwell. There's another reason to stay out of the American medical system. It's just amazing. All right, getting back to the economy. The Baltic Dry Index has dropped 5.4%. Now, what that means is before there is manufacturing, there must be the ordering of raw materials. And the Baltic Dry Index is simply a measure of how much raw materials are being transported across the face of the globe to go to various manufacturing concerns. And so if the Baltic Dry Index is going down, it means that orders for manufactured goods are in decline, and the manufacturers are having to slow down their operation. Now, it was going to be estimated that the jobless claims this week were going to be something like 311,000. They actually jumped up to 374,000. We're getting these through various payroll companies because the official Department of Labor Statistics is on furlough, along with the rest of the government shutdown. But if they thought that was going to keep us from hearing the bad news, they were sadly mistaken. Now, the government likes to tell us that the rate of bank failures has slowed since the 2008 crash, and that is certainly true, as the weak are culled from the herd. But the reality is that today, 2013, banks are still failing at 10 times the rate of the failures prior to the 2008 crash, which was caused by that mortgage-backed security fraud. So I'm really not seeing that there's really an improvement. The disaster has slowed down. The ship is sinking a little bit slower, but it's still sinking here. Now, a while back, the Obama administration floated this idea of having the Treasury issue a single platinum coin with a face value of $1 trillion on it, which they would then give to the Federal Reserve, and in exchange, the Federal Reserve would send $1 trillion in currency back. And they were basically going back to the part of the Constitution saying that the U.S. government has the right to coin money. But back when the Constitution was written, the reason they used the word coin was because the money was the physical silver and gold in the coinage. The paper currency was a claim check only. It was just created for convenience. The money was the silver and gold in the coin. Now, this platinum coin isn't really containing $1 trillion in platinum, or you wouldn't be able to pick it up or move it. It is a symbol. It is a fiat currency. It is a complete violation of the Coinage Act of 1792. And it's just another way of flooding more instantly created money out of thin air from the Federal Reserve while trying to claim that it is being compensated for by this $1 trillion platinum coin, which really isn't worth all that much in terms of its physical metal value, a few $1,000s at best. It's just another propaganda dodge to let the Federal Reserve pump more newly created money into the economy and make it look like it doesn't really represent a loan. Even though, in theory, the Federal Reserve at some point in the future can present that coin back to the U.S. government and say, we need $1 trillion for it. So it's a stopgap propaganda measure. It is really not a solution. I know Ellen Brown thinks this is a really good idea as a temporary fix, but that's all it is. It's a temporary fix. The real solution is to get rid of that private central bank and its interest-bearing public currency. And the U.S. government is not in a position to redeem that $1 trillion coin any more than it's in a position to redeem all of those overprinted Treasury bonds. It's just another empty piece of something symbol to give to the Federal Reserve to justify the release of more currency. And it has no more validity than the Treasury bonds do, which are in a huge bubble. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Remember, we've been talking about the war for the banker being a war to force the world back onto Bretton Woods, and how nations are abandoning the dollar faster than the U.S. can conquer them? Well, now China and the European Union have agreed to a 45 billion euro currency swap direct without going through the U.S. dollar. The writing is on the wall. The dollar is on its way out as the international trade and reserve currency, and without that piece of the action of the rest of the world's commerce, there is nothing supporting it. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm sorry I'm having a little bit of problems with the fader on this mixer out here. Now, up in Detroit, like these people don't have enough problems, the former mayor of Detroit has been sentenced to 28 years in jail for corruption. He was found guilty on 24 of 30 counts of corruption, including extortion, racketeering, bribery, mail, wire, and tax fraud. This is a good portrait of our political class. And I noticed that a lot of the corporate media is saying that even though this guy was doing all of these things, that it really had nothing to do with Detroit's economic woes, that is really, you know, we shouldn't blame the politicians for this. I mean, they're shifting the blame. Of course, if you have a mayor who is engaging in this kind of activity, he and his cohorts are making money off the backs of the people. It doesn't just appear out of nowhere. Anytime somebody does a scam somewhere, somebody else has to pay for it. When Bernie Madoff was ripping $65 billion out of his own investors, those investors were losing money. When somebody scams a Wall Street stock deal, like insider trading, that money that they reap in profits comes out of the traded company and out of the investors of that company. So, yeah, I think the people of Detroit would be justified in standing up and saying, hey, if this guy was that much of a crook, why are we having to suffer the economic consequences for it? Going to take a phone call here. Nosium up in the Netherlands. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Hello again. Yesterday you talked about governments that are like people. So people get older, governments get older, and governments then get corrupted. Not like old people. Maybe old people go in a wheelchair or something, but governments will get corrupt in a long time. And the interesting part is that I wanted to talk about you is that people need to be aware that of that fact what you said, so that governments get older, they get corrupt, not only in America, it's worldwide. So people need to always ask questions. Always ask the government questions: why, what, when, and where, and whatever, about taxes, everything. And the media, the mainstream media, has done a great job in deceiving the people to not see the reality. So it's indeed a war on the mind. So I want to thank you that you said that yesterday. That was a very, very interesting point to make. So I just want to elaborate on that, and maybe you want to say more about it, or you can go further on it.
Well, all governments tend toward oligarchy, and it is the curse of political power that it attracts the very people who should not be allowed to have it. And that is the reason why the founding fathers of this nation attempted to diffuse authority and power over the entire country, granting most of it to the individual states to run their own business. And the central federal government was originally envisioned as arbitrating between the states, but otherwise keeping their mitts off. If it's happening inside a state, the federal government didn't have jurisdiction. Following the American Civil War, of course, we saw all these amendments to the Constitution that basically arrogated more power to that central federal government, including that horrible amendment that the federal government debt can never be questioned. You will just accept that we tell you you owe this money because we had to borrow it. And again, this was all under the influence of the money junkies, who had succeeded in getting Lincoln assassinated to end the greenback and force the nation back into that model of borrowing banknotes at interest from those private banks. It's all driven by these money junkies. And unfortunately, politicians, as Aaron Russo used to say, they'd sell their own mother for $1. And because of this concentration of power and authority in Washington, D.C., the Capitol building has just become this giant one-stop shopping center for the corrupting influences of society.
Yeah, that's true. My mother always says they go so far that even they will dig up graves and looking for the golden teeth. Yeah,
it is. And again, back to this idea that the money is addicting. Money is very addicting, and we need to recognize that it is a serious mental illness, just like heroin addiction, alcohol addiction, cocaine addiction, meth addiction. Money is addicting. And this was very much illustrated during that wonderful documentary Inside Job, which won the Academy Award for Best Documentary a couple of years ago, and then promptly vanished from the American scene, where scientists actually wired up the brains of Wall Street traders to these brain scanners, and they found out that every time these traders did a good score, made a huge amount of money on one of their little shenanigans, the part of the brain that lit up was exactly the same one that lights up when you're doing cocaine. And by the way, as a corollary, there's a lot of cocaine use on Wall Street. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And again...
thank you very much. Sorry?
Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. And again, we're not opposed to people making money. We're not opposed to people like, the examples I use are Steve Jobs and James Cameron, who became rich by making good movies, good products that we voluntarily choose to give our money for. We're talking about the scammers and manipulators on Wall Street who simply rig the system by bribing members of Congress to guarantee wealth flows to them without returning anything of tangible value to society, all the way up to and including the Federal Reserve System itself, which has grown rich by getting a piece of the action of everything every single American does by forcing us to use currency that is borrowed at interest from that private central bank. That's not how the nation was started. And we need to get rid of that. I'm tired of people floating trillion-dollar coins and all these other little deceptions. It doesn't cure the root problem. And we are past the stage where symbolic gestures and halfway measures and temporary fixes are going to save the situation. We need to look at the fundamental flaws in Wall Street's thinking, and we need to directly deal with those. Now, turning to the international news, Sergei Lavrov is out there reasserting that Russia's own investigation as to what happened on August 21st in Syria is that absolutely without question it was the hired mercenaries that carried out that chemical weapon attack. And we knew that all along because the U.S. claimed that Assad gassed women and children of his own Alawite supporters right in front of UN chemical weapons inspectors on the very day they arrived just never made any sense. The part to look for that wasn't there was a motive for Assad to do something like that. It achieves no military objective. It certainly does not help him politically to do that. It never, ever made any sense at all. And I think it is an indicator of our government's absolute disdain for the intellectual capacity of Americans that they actually thought we were going to buy such a nonsensical claim in the first place. They really do apparently think we're all clueless morons, or that we're all the product already of Common Core, and we are not. We actually know how to think, which is why the government's very nervous about us right now. Now, Israel is back out there talking about warmongering. They've apparently fired a rocket into Syria in response to this supposed mortar attack that scared one soldier and apparently scratched another with shrapnel, even though, again, it makes no sense that Syria would actually do something that stupid, like firing a couple of mortar shells into the Golan Heights. If Syria was going to attack, they would have done it across a wide front and gone as deep as they can. But Israel's already out there saying, war is possible, you've got to help us. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And as I was mentioning before the break, the Army Chief of Israel is saying, war is possible on many fronts. Oh, we're under threat from all these nations around us who hate us. You must give us more money and weapons. They're already asking for more, always asking for more money. Right now, the American taxpayer, I had to revise my number upward, the American taxpayer has been forced to give Israel 60 times the entire cost of the Apollo moon program. And we have not received a giant leap for mankind. Or any new technology for all that money. It's just money out the door. Might as well have put it up in a giant pile and set fire to it for all the good it did for the United States of America. And the historical reality is that Israel's always starting the wars. Starting with 1948, when they invaded Palestine. 1956, Israel helped England and France attack Egypt over the Suez Canal. 1967, Israel attacked Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. 1981, Israel bombed Iraq's nuclear reactor at Osirak, claiming there was a bomb factory underneath, and that turned out to be a complete lie. 1982, they attacked Lebanon. 2002, Ariel Sharon invaded the West Bank. 2006, Israel invaded Lebanon again. 2008, Israel bombed Gaza. In 2012, they attacked Gaza again during Bibi Netanyahu's election campaign. Not to forget all these various air raids against Syria, Lebanon, and attacking the USS Liberty, the Mavi Marara, and so forth and so on. Israel is the clear aggressor. And every time they attack another country around them and that country fights back, they say, please, America, help us. We're victims. We're poor, suffering, helpless victims. No, they're not. They're the world's sixth most powerful nuclear nation. They're building between 10 and 15 new nuclear weapons every single year in that bomb factory hidden underneath the Dimona Power Station. Now, down in Brazil, things are going ugly there. Teachers are rioting, demanding better pay, because Brazil is being forced into austerity. And, of course, austerity means take more away from the people to give to the money junkies. There's a 10,000-strong riot that is now throwing fire bombs at police and various other government buildings, along with blue pencils, I guess. And the really bad rioters have to stay after class and clean the erasers here. Over in Libya, the prime minister was briefly abducted by gunmen and then released as a warning over this U.S. incursion into Libya to kidnap this gentleman. The U.S. is still insisting is a terror mastermind, even though the guy they're saying it is was actually arrested back in 2002. Supposedly he's down in Guantanamo. And the family of the man who was actually captured is saying he's just a pizza cook. He's not a terror mastermind. Obama was trying for a grandstand demonstration of the success of the war on terror with these raids into Libya and Somalia. Somalia, they lost the element of surprise. The SEALs had to retreat without accomplishing anything. And now this situation in Libya, they got the wrong guy and seriously undermined the stability of the pro-American Libyan government. Now, getting on over to the NSA, apparently NSA's head, General Keith Alexander, is out there chastising the corporate media for daring to cover what the NSA has been doing. I mean, just because it's illegal and unconstitutional and a hideous waste of taxpayer money doesn't mean it's something the American people need to know. Of course we need to know. That's why the corporate media, that's why the press got that First Amendment. Because their job, their responsibility was to report on government wrongdoing and to be able to do so without fear of repercussions. So apparently Keith Alexander thinks those days are gone, that we have to slap the media around if they're informing the American people how their government is misbehaving. Now, speaking of the NSA, there's another story that's been getting a suspiciously large amount of coverage over the last few days involving that brand new multi-billion-dollar data center in Utah. Now, remember, it's not the only such data center. They've got some over in Virginia. They've actually got a small version here on the island of Oahu, up in the middle of the island. But this big Utah data hub was supposedly has the capacity to record every single phone call on planet Earth by every single human for a space of 7 years, according to our calculations. And all of a sudden they're saying, oh, it's not going to open after all. Where they're talking about all these meltdowns and power system surges and how it's destroying equipment, and it's at least another year before this Utah data hub is going to be operational. Okay. Maybe. Maybe. I mean, given the spectacular quality of work done by the U.S. government, such as the F-22, the F-35, the USS San Antonio, the Littoral Combat Ships, and, of course, healthcare.gov, this story could be true. It's another hideous taxpayer-funded boondoggle that can't be made to work. Or this could be a piece of propaganda to take the focus off that Utah data center, saying, oh, it's not working anyway, we don't need to pay any attention to it. Yes, you can go back to sending naked pictures of your significant other through the email and your business plans and your aunt's secret chocolate chip cookie recipe because we're not watching you. We don't have the facility. It's not working. And the reason I think it's a hoax to get you to forget about securing your own communications is because how often does this government admit, let alone issue press releases about its monumental failures? We still can't get them to own up about the fact that this computer system for Obamacare is hopelessly not ready for use. And here we have the NSA saying, oh, our big data collection facility, yeah, there have been fires, the power supply, it's going to be another year. You don't need to worry about us spying on you for at least another year. And if you buy that one, I've got some of Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction to sell you. Apparently, the NSA is neck deep in President Obama's targeted kill list. When Obama decides he's going to send drones into other people's countries and kill their citizens, because every time they get one terror suspect, they're nailing an average of 50 innocent bystanders. Apparently, the NSA spying system is where they're getting at least some of those names. We know a lot of those names come from the very generous bounties being offered by the U.S. government in these targeted countries, which opens up the possibility that a lot of these people being named as suspects and killed were only named as suspects for the fast buck, or to get rid of a rival lover. You know, I want this girl, Charlie wants this girl, I'll just name Charlie as a terror suspect, the U.S. will kill him for me, and I'm off and happy. Or, hey, we've got two bakery shops in the town square, and they're both struggling, so I'm going to tell the U.S. government that the owner of my rival bake shop is a terror suspect. They'll take out his bake shop with a drone strike, and now I've got all the business to myself. It's a completely reckless way of doing these things. And, of course, we know the NSA and PRISM are gathering huge amounts of information surveilling social media like Facebook and MySpace. And I have a news flash for the NSA. People lie on Facebook, especially if they're trying to get a hot date for the weekend. They exaggerate what they're doing. They're living fantasy lives out in Facebook. It's amazing, amazing stuff. More revelations. They're keeping the metadata for up to a year, and they're still maintaining that it's not a violation of the Fourth Amendment until somebody actually peeks at it. That's like a burglar going into your home and stealing your wife's jewelry and saying, it isn't actually a crime until I fence it or trade it for drugs. According to Snowden, NSA is trying to literally build a 6th degree of separation for every American citizen. Talk about a useless body of data. I don't know my friends' friends. I don't know all of them. I certainly don't know all of my friends' friends' friends. And yet the NSA is saving all this data to build this network of associations, which is completely meaningless. By now, it's an open secret, as you were, that the Tor anonymizer was an NSA target, and we now know it has, in fact, been compromised. The NSA was finally forced to... Remember when all this scandal was coming up and the NSA was in congressional hearings and saying, we've stopped 50 terror attacks against the American people with our spy system, and we can't tell you about it because it's national security. And then finally they were forced to admit that, yeah, they were exaggerating and they were making it up. And part of that, of course, is that the NSA was claiming credit for stopping one act of terror, which was actually stopped by just plain old everyday police work. And they were trying to claim credit for that. So it's very much... They're lying. They're still lying. They don't know how to... if at first you don't succeed, lie again. These people don't even know how to tell the truth. It's always perception management and manufacturing of consent. And the idea of actually representing to the American people what's really going on just is not inside those SSRI-addled craniums. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And finishing up on the NSA, yes, they are data mining Twitter and Facebook, but they insist they are not building personal files on Americans. Yeah, right. And again, what idiot invested billions of dollars on the idea that social media is a reliable source of raw intelligence? Are they really that clueless? They might as well be reading tea leaves or doing tarot cards to find out what's going on. So they're reeling in embarrassment over the fact that they had to admit that, yeah, they hadn't really stopped all those terror attacks and everything. And, of course, the reason is very simple. We proved it with our NSA challenge. Real criminals and real terrorists have the resources to devise their own encryption methods. And the NSA cannot break those in a timely manner. We already proved that. The NSA is able to read all the traffic out there because they've managed to bamboozle everybody into using standard off-the-shelf encryption, which the NSA already has the method to if they have not actually backdoored. This image of the NSA as the master cryptographers able to break any message is a myth. It's not true. We already proved that here. Alrighty, let's see. Skip on down here. New records detailing FBI infusion center monitoring of activists and anarchists. And that's another reason why the NSA isn't catching criminals and terrorists. They're not looking. They're watching you. Because those slaves are getting uppity. They're starting to struggle against their chains. We can't have that. Now, if you're an activist, even if you're an anarchist, that is a political position to which you have a right under the First Amendment. Having a different opinion about politics from the government is not a crime, and therefore the FBI and the fusion centers have no legal grounds to be surveilling you and investigating you. They're just doing it because they serve a higher purpose. We've seen this before. It's called the true believer mentality. People inside government, they start thinking, well, we don't have to follow those laws and rules because we serve a higher purpose. We know there's a higher agenda. And they start going on out and just doing whatever they want to do in service to whatever that agenda is that they believe in or have been paid to believe in. And that's where some of our biggest foreign policy disasters come from. We have been talking about this current state of psychological repression that we see in our country, and I know Phyllis Shapley talks about it, where, kids who bite their pastry into the shape of a gun are being harassed. There's another story we have up at the front page of whatreallyhappened.com about a high school kid had a tackle box in his car in the high school parking lot, and inside the tackle box was a fishing knife to scale the fish. He did not have it on his person. He did not bring it into school. They're talking about charging him with a felony because merely having a knife with a blade over, I think it's something like 2 inches. That's a felony, and we're going to ruin your life and send you to prison with a felony conviction on your record because you dared have a fishing scaler in your tackle box, in your car, in our parking lot. They're trying to create a climate between educational intolerance and the police abuse of the people to basically get the entire American people into a psychological state where we're just standing there frozen, afraid to do anything because of what might happen. And I don't think it's working because it seems to really be pissing Americans off here right now. Apparently, up in Wisconsin, apparently Grant County District Attorney is being sued by the parents of a 6-year-old boy who was charged with a felony sexual assault, first-degree sexual assault, because he was caught playing doctor with a 5-year-old girl. Now, come on. You know, when you're growing up, sooner or later, everybody will start saying, oh, what are those other ones over there, and what do they look like? It's not sexual assault. It's a 6-year-old, and they charged him with first-degree sexual assault, a Class B felony. And the justification by this district attorney, Lisa Ramaker, is that the legislature didn't put an age restriction in the first-degree sexual assault statute. Therefore, anybody, little tiny 1-year-old baby, reaches over and touches a baby of the opposite gender, oh, that's first. They're completely out of control. Don't these people have real crimes to deal with? Go to Wall Street in Washington, D.C. There are criminals aplenty there who desperately need to be thrown in the hoosegow. And instead they're out there charging 6-year-old boys first-degree sexual assault, a felony, because he was looking at a 5-year-old girl. I mean, I'm sorry, when I was a kid, I mean, you didn't tell your parents that's what you were doing, but that was kind of growing up. Exploring the world and seeing what all the brouhaha was about between boys and girls. I don't think there's anybody listening to this show who didn't go through that experience when they were a kid. It's not a reason to charge you with a felony. Now, apparently the police, who don't have enough money to go out and get robbers and muggers and rapists or anything like that, I mean, they're all out there busy writing traffic tickets for the huge fines, but apparently they've got the budget to infiltrate football game parking lots, well, you know, the tailgate parties. And they got themselves a nice little camper or motor home, and they're dressed in civilian clothes, they're undercover, and they're basically taking videotape of the tailgate parties at football games under the Department of Homeland Security-sponsored Urban Areas Security Initiative. We're watching everything you do. There is no place you can go that we're not keeping an eye on you. And like I said, the goal here is psychological repression of the American people, to get us so paralyzed with fear that we'll just stand there doing absolutely nothing until the government says, you go kill that person living over the oil. And you will say, yes, master, and you'll be off to do whatever. And I think Americans are really fed up with that. I know the truckers are. This truckers ride for the Constitution. That's what the big part of what this is about. This constant surveillance. And it's going to backfire. And it's not just my opinion, because remember all those horrible incidents of postal workers going on mass killing sprees, and they called it going postal? That was actually a reaction to a program the post office put in of efficiency improvement, which resulted in efficiency experts just constantly watching the postal workers and literally telling them which way to turn their wrist to gain a tenth of a second speed advantage when sorting mail. And it drove those postal workers crazy. Put them right over the edge. And that's what all this psychological repression of the American people is going to do. I know all those academics are out there studying their books by B.F. Skinner and saying if we do this, they'll do that. But it never really works, because under the most tightly controlled conditions of temperature, pressure, air content, water, and food, the studied organism is still going to do what it darn well wants to. just to spite those guys in the white lab coats here. Oh, my goodness here. Let's see. Close the Silk Road, trying to grab the bitcoins here. Apparently, the Los Angeles Unified School District has halted the issuance of local iPads for the students after the students were able to get around the firewall and look at non-educational sites, which tells us that this whole giving of computers to the students is all about getting you used to using devices that only connect with government-approved URLs. At huge taxpayer expense. And, of course, the hackers are going to get around that. Apparently, there's a new zero-day fault in the Internet Explorer that hackers are just going through. Let's see what else coming down here. The House won a court victory over Eric Holder on Fast and Furious. Holder was trying to keep the courts from looking into the Fast and Furious documents because they don't want Americans to know that the same government that's taking away your assault rifles was spending your tax money to give those military weapons to drug criminals. We'll be back after Phyllis Schlafly and some commercials, hopefully with Kevin Barrett in tow. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we go to our guest for the third hour, just a real quick word. Apparently, the GOP in the House just finished a press conference where they announced they're going to allow the debt ceiling to be increased temporarily for the next 6 weeks without touching Obamacare. They're even changing the wording. It's not a debt ceiling increase, it's a debt ceiling extension to make it sound friendlier. And I think the thinking is 6 weeks from now, the American people who forgot all about the battle to defund Obamacare, and the GOP can basically cave into this increase in the debt ceiling. And I told you they were going to do it, and it's not temporary because they did it in January, and that wasn't temporary either. So congratulations, Americans. You can leave to your future generations even more unpayable debt than you yourself struggle with. Now, joining us on the phone is Kevin Barrett, and Kevin is joining us today to talk about his new book, Dynamic Duo. Kevin, thank you for being with us today, and tell us what the book is about.
Well, it's great to be back with you, Mike. And actually, unfortunately, it's not my book. It's about me and Jim Fetzer. The author is Mike Polachek. Mike is a novelist. He's published, I believe, more than a dozen novels, which are a lot of fun, including some 9/11 truth stuff. He's humorous. So he's kind of like Kurt Vonnegut in a certain way. Mm-hmm. But anyway, this is, I think, his first nonfiction book. And it's called Dynamic Duo, White Rose Blooms in Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. And it's arguing that people like me and Jim Fetzer and you, Mike, for that matter, are examples of a new sort of white rose-style resistance. He's saying that we're the equivalent of these white rose forces that were resisting Nazi fascism in Germany in more than half a century ago.
I hope not 100% because they all got beheaded by the Nazis, but up until that point, you know, I'll do the illusion. And actually, every once in a while, I'll buy my wife a white rose just to keep that little symbolism going there. Yeah, I'm very familiar with Mike Polachek. We've had him on the show, and I've referred to his work an awful lot of the time. And it's absolutely true that the independent media, typified by people such as yourself, have basically undertaken the traditional role of the corporate media, which is a watchdog on government abuse. And it's rather amazing to see the corporate media, which enjoys all this First Amendment protection and special legal privileges, have just consistently, completely sold out to corporate and government interests. And then when we try and step in and do the job they claim to be doing, we get smeared, we get attacked, we get ridiculed, hacker attacks on our servers. We've had that twice this week so far. Where do you see all of this going ultimately?
Well, I hope it's not going all the way to having all of our heads cut off.
I don't know. Me too. I mean, in the best option, not the worst option, but the best option. What do you think is going on?
Well, you know, actually, I am more optimistic than that. I think that the world is very slowly waking up. These new communications technologies that allow shows like yours to be widely broadcast and disseminated, as well as the rise of literacy and education all over the world, are making people into critical thinkers who have at least some idea of how the world really works and what's going on all over the world. Now, the problem, though, is that, you know, I don't think the big media has ever been a very good watchdog. And ironically, as we've moved into this sort of, you know, post-Gutenberg world of Internet communications, at the same time that we have this incredible free speech on the Internet, we're also being, brainwashed in a more powerful way than ever before. And I think that's what Mike is getting at in this book, comparing our resistance to the White Rose resistance, is that he's arguing that, the way normal Americans look at the Hitler regime as this just completely out of control, psychotic mass murdering regime that was full of big lies. Well, that's really a pretty good description of what we've got now, only most people don't realize it. And so I think that as the world wakes up, we may have some pain to go through as we reach the point where a more transparent world with honest communication and people, becoming real critical thinkers, that's a ways down the road. But I think we're moving in that direction. So I do think that the long-term trend is in our favor if we can prevent the planet from being destroyed and humanity from being completely enslaved before we get there.
Well, that's certainly the agenda I've been following here at what I'm doing here for the last 20 years. I think the world very much is waking up, and maybe even faster than you anticipate, because I look back at this lame story the government tried to sell of how Syria's Bashar al-Assad used chemical weapons on women and children of his own Alawite supporters right in front of the United Nations chemical weapons inspectors on the day they arrived. And there was a huge public backlash against that, which I think tells me the majority of Americans certainly are aware that this government is lying about pretty much everything. Now they're trying to figure out what they're going to do about it, because obviously nobody in their right mind wants to live under a government that is misrepresenting everything to them, to manufacture their consent, to win their support for wars and conquests we otherwise would say really are not in the nation's best interest. Zbigniew Brzezinski called it the Great Global Political Awakening. Of course, he's phrasing it as a problem because he sees himself as part of that class of people who have just gotten used to, over the last several generations, being able to just put out any complete nonsense they want and have it accepted as face value by a very naive, gullible, and trusting public, and those days are pretty much gone. Some people, like Brzezinski, are recognizing that the world has changed around them and there is a need for government and corporations and media to adapt to that new reality, but there are still quite a few people in the halls of power who are still trying to run the world by the methods and tricks that worked back at the height of the Cold War in the 1950s and 1960s, and they keep slamming up against these utter, complete failures. They're pointing fingers, and they're not really ready, apparently, to reevaluate that the methods of government and the relationship with its population have to be revised back to what it was when this nation was started, where people and the government are in a partnership to move the nation as a whole forward, not just government there with all the power and authority to sell it to the highest bidder. And I'm hoping we can get that transition going in a non-violent way, but how violent that transition will be is entirely under the control of the federal government at this time.
I agree completely. I agree 100% with you, Mike, about your assertion that this Syria chemical weapons incident might be a turning point, because in so many ways, this was a pretty obvious false flag. At least it was a prima facie false flag, because nobody in their right mind would think that Assad would be doing a militarily useless chemical attack on a neighborhood of ordinary people, not even people resisting him or fighting against him, at the exact moment that the UN chemical weapons inspectors were coming into Damascus just a few miles away. It made no sense whatsoever from the get-go, and then more and more information came out supporting this false flag interpretation, and so many people, including fairly mainstream people like Pat Buchanan, Ronna Rand Paul, and even Lawrence Wilkerson, were calling it out as a false flag. The word false flag, the term false flag, is spreading like wildfire. People are now awake to that possibility in a way that they weren't before 9/11. If they had been, I don't think 9/11 would have gotten the results that it did. So, yeah, I think that's a huge historical landmark, and the fact that it had such a geopolitical effect, because Obama was being pressured to bomb Syria, and then he stalled and wavered and decided not to at the last minute. Thereby going to Congress and saying, actually, maybe Congress is supposed to have the power to decide whether or not we go to war.
Yeah, and then AIPAC did the full court press out. They literally bet their reputation. We will get Congress to authorize war in Syria, and they didn't. And I think it says something very alarming about our government, that they actually really still thought the American people were going to hear, oh, Assad gassed his own people, yes, we'll go to war. And I think it shows how dangerously out of touch they are with the mainstream society and culture in this day and age, whether it's all because they're on SSRIs or they're just surrounded by advisors who are protecting their jobs by telling them what they think the boss wants to know rather than what's really going on. But it's very clearly a sign they don't really comprehend what's going out here in the minds of America. We have to take a break for commercial. We'll be back in 3 minutes with more from Kevin Barrett about the current course, the new version of the White Rose Society. And again, up until the point where they haul us off to behead us, I'm definitely in favor of that illusion. We'll be right back. America, welcome back to the show. We're talking with Kevin Barrett about the new face of the independent media. And I call it the independent media because alternative media had negative connotations. And as far as the TV networks and newspapers, I don't even call them the mainstream media anymore. I call them the corporate media because that's what they are. But they're not the mainstream anymore. Polls consistently show that the majority of Americans and people around the world are now getting all of their political news and information from the online independent media sources. CNBC just had their worst ratings in 20 years. They have something like 38,000 viewers per day in the 25 to 54-year-old demographic. Now, I can't match that, but I come really close, and I'm not spending millions and millions of dollars every day to get those 38,000 viewers in. So we are definitely gaining ground, and we are emerging victorious. Of course, we cheated. We're using the truth. But we're the new mainstream. This is it right here.
It's interesting because the bad guys have been going further in their efforts to control us by surreptitious means than most people realize. Most people meaning everybody except what really happened, readers and listeners to shows like yours and mine. I'm sure you're aware that prior to the JFK assassination 50 years ago, there was a huge media control program that involved not only planting assets and getting control of ownership at all of the leading media public outlets, but also they actually were set up to take down the phone lines, if necessary, nationwide.
Well, you're talking about Mockingbird.
Mockingbird was Cord Meyer's program. Cord Meyer, his wife Mary, was having an affair with JFK and turning him towards world peace, was in charge of this Mockingbird program to control the media. But beyond that, there was this. They were set up to take down national and even selected kind of phone lines to prevent people from making phone calls about the assassination. I mean, they really had the country ready to be locked down. And today we have kind of an interesting parallel, as there's this new story, I'm sure you're aware of it, I think you even linked it, where Elizabeth Woodworth, the David Ray Griffin's research assistant, has been researching the way that a really good 9/11 truth video called 9/11 in Operation Northwoods, Operation Northwoods in 9/11 from Russia Today, was effectively shut down as it was about to go viral on September 11th. By internet manipulation, including completely removing that video from all Google and YouTube search engines right at the moment it was starting to go viral. And get this, Mike, they actually froze or they censored people's emails. That is, a large number of people who tried to email the link to this video, Operation Northwoods in 9/11, found that email disappeared into the ether. And even when they tried to email it to themselves, it wouldn't come to them. It wouldn't go to their friends. It wouldn't go to anybody. So a lot of people who tried to email this link found that email just never got there. So somebody like NSA is probably the obvious culprit. And we have heard from Wayne Madsen that 1,000 full-time NSA employees are working to prevent 9/11 truth from breaking out. So these people are tweaking our
Well, there's a waste of tax money.
Yeah, well, no kidding, because it's not working because, they would really have to shut down the whole Internet to really stop this. And if we raise hell about this stuff each time it happens, it backfires and blows up in their faces. So it's really an interesting sort of predator-prey, info war. And we're luckily on the good side of history here.
Kevin, you're the predator. We're the predators. We're the predator. They're our prey. And you're right, they do back down. And sometimes they get very petty in their arrogance here because, as you're probably already aware, my wife is a composer and she's written a lot of really good music. We have had our demo singers come back and say, you got to take my name off the demo. I got talked to by my school administrators. We've had publishers and producers say, I love your stuff, but my backers say I can't use any of it. We've made these music videos on YouTube, and we have caught YouTube literally freezing the view count so that it doesn't get up into any of the search lists. and we'll call them on it, and then magically our view count numbers will, skyrocket 2 or 3 days later. But all of these tactics that they use only work if the public is unaware that it's going on. And the public is now aware that all this stuff is going on. Just like the public is now aware the government is peeking into their business secrets, their private photos of their boyfriends and girlfriends. I've lost count of the number of FBI people who've been charged with insider trading for stealing business secrets off of business owners' laptops and going to their stockbrokers with it. And, all of these tactics that they're using only work if the public that they're being used on is unaware that it's happening. But those days are also gone for good. And from this point on, everything the government tries to do to reassert its control over the people only advertises the fact that the government is losing control. And it angers the American people because we want to be treated with the respect due to a human being and a citizen of the United States of America. We do not want to be managed or handled as if we are livestock or human capital. We don't want to be told what foods we must eat, what foods we can't eat. We don't want to be told that we can't know what's in the food that we're being fed. We don't want to be told what medicines we must take and what medicines we can't take. We're sick and tired of being micromanaged as if we're somebody's property because we are not property. We are human beings, and we're deserving of respect by a government that, in theory, is supposed to be working for us. It's like this whole brouhaha over the national parks where the park rangers are saying, well, the federal government owns these parks. No, they don't. Those national parks, those highways, those monuments belong to we the people. The government is a hired caretaker that is allowed to be the caretaker only so long as they obey the rules of their boss, that is us, and that means the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And this government has grown arrogant, drunk with power. They're just hand in glove with the money junkies. And their only solution they can think of isn't to go back to playing by the rules, but to somehow enforce this attitude that they are in charge and we're supposed to do what we're told. And we've reached that point in our history where everything they do from this point on is only going to make the situation worse. We have a coffee mug we sell over at our online store that has the slogan on it, different slogan. The fastest way to bring down a dictatorship is to force them to act like one where everybody can see it, and we've reached that stage because everything this government does only reminds the American people we are living in a dictatorship, and they're getting angry about it. Kevin, we only have a few minutes left here because we got another guest coming on bottom of the hour. What is your website where people who are interested in what you're talking about and doing can go?
Well, I'll give you two. One is my own personal website, which is truthjihad.com. Can't forget that one. And then, of course, the book, Dynamic Duo, is available through cwgpress.com. That's cwgpress.
All righty. Well, I'm going to put a link up to truthjihad.com at whatreallyhappened.com so that our listeners can find it very quickly and easily. And, Kevin, thank you again for spending some time with us today. We're going to let you go here. And before we get to the bottom of the hour and the commercial break here, apparently over in Indiana, they're mounting a lawsuit to take Obamacare back to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, remember, we already know that Chief Justice Roberts has been compromised because he was opposed to Obamacare and at the last second did a 180, voted it through saying it's justified under the Commerce Act, and then promptly left the country for a week to duck the resulting press furor. But the state of Indiana is now going to take Obamacare back to the United States Supreme Court. And the momentum against Obamacare is building, especially with this Charlie Foxtrot computer system, $600 million in 3 years, and it is hopelessly unusable. And yet Obama, because of his ego or his vanity or just the desire for an additional $200 billion in tax revenue, is still insisting this must move forward. The wise and prudent thing would have been to say, yeah, it's got to be delayed by a year. So it's going to be a fist fight to get rid of this thing. It's an absolute blessing for the health insurance companies and a disaster for the American people, and it must go. We'll be back after these commercials with our next guest, Zeeta Andrews, talking about the trucker's ride for the Constitution. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our show, and joining us on the phone right now is Zeeta Andrews for the Truckers Ride for the Constitution. Zeeta, thank you very much for spending time with us. I know you're on the road and very busy. What's the latest news?
Well, thank you, and glad to be here. Oh, you want to hear the latest news?
Yes.
Well, they have a convoy on its way here to the East Coast from Alaska, and they're picking up drivers as they go.
All the way from Alaska. Wow, that's amazing.
Yep, and and they're very excited. People are getting excited because they're starting to see it, and they'll arrive tomorrow. And people are already gathering at Doswell, at the Doswell truck stop off of 95, exit 98. I do not have an update on the Wilco truck stop in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, because I've been so busy. Haven't had a chance.
Well, all right, you're breaking up here a little bit. I understand from email I'm getting that these truck stops are already filled to capacity. And by the way, apparently somebody did get in touch with the Virginia National Guard, and there is absolutely no order to shut down the Beltway. That story was a complete hoax to try and bluff the truckers into turning around and going home. It's amazing how dirty the government will play to try and shut this thing down. But these truckers are not just truckers. They're representative of all of America. They've got the bikers riding with them. The World War II veterans are converging on D.C. this weekend. This is going to be absolutely huge, and the corporate media and government are trying to pretend that it's no big deal.
The provocators out everything and everything stop this. Road, it's told, and it's true. It's not stuff. It only made longer. So are you mean it's them strong? They're doing it have a real effect and harmful. It's tired. The trucker can time.
Okay, yeah. Zeeta, I'm sorry, but you're breaking up so badly we cannot understand you. Why don't you hang up? Our control room is going to try and call you back and see if we can get a better connection because it's very important for people to hear what's going on here. And while we're reconnecting with Zeeta, I would like all of you out there to make a point on Saturday of getting out somewhere to show your support for the Truckers' Ride for the Constitution, even if that means just get a piece of cardboard, say, I support the Truckers' Ride for the Constitution, stand on a street corner down in the center of town, take a picture of yourself, send it in, I'll post it on whatreallyhappened.com and make you famous. This is a time for all Americans to stand up and be visible, to send a message to the rest of the world that we, the people of the United States of America, do not agree with or support anything this federal government is doing. We know they are lying to start wars of conquest. They're lying about the state of the economy. They're just desperate to grab more money, and we're not going to be the wallets of last resort, mostly because we're already tapped out. We're absolutely tapped out. Wall Street succeeded. The Federal Reserve succeeded. They've got all the nation's money in their pocket. There is no more out here to grab to float their little Ponzi scheme, pyramid system, central bank any further. And again, the question every American should be asking right now is if the Constitution gives the government the right to create and issue an interest-free public currency, why is that government borrowing currency at interest from a privately owned central bank? Why have they been doing it for the last 100 years, which is what has created this multi-trillion-dollar debt situation? Okay, Zeeta, we got you back online. Can you sort of repeat what you were trying to tell us before?
Hopefully it's a better connection.
Much better, much better.
I forgot what I was saying. You know, I'm old, y'all.
Well, so am I here.
What was the question? What was the question?
Well, you were just telling us about how all these people are coming in from places like Alaska. I remember when this was first being promoted, and they were saying, it'll be the eastern seaboard. No, it isn't. It's all over the country. We had a caller into our show yesterday out in Utah who said he broke into tears, literally, driving on a highway in Utah, seeing all these trucks with California and Nevada plates escorted by the bikers just heading off to the east, and he realized that he was witness to something that is very, very historic. It is peaceful. This is a peaceful exercise of First Amendment right. Nobody is trying to go for a confrontation except the government.
That's right. And this is a peaceful rally. This is an opportunity. Right for the Constitution is an opportunity for every American that feels like they're hopeless and can't do anything. They're wrong. They can get out and join, whether it's at the overpasses, your state capitol, or come to D.C., or just get out in your car and hit the interstate and jam up traffic. That's what it's all about, is to slow everything down, take a look around, and we are in a constitutional crisis. We have elected officials that have no regard for the law of the land, and they have deemed themselves on a higher plane than us. We can't allow them to do that, and we do not consent. That's it. We do not give our consent for them to destroy our Constitution. So this is what it is all about. Now, this is just the beginning of the awakening. This is not going to stop right here. We're going to have one of these once a month until they just get tired or whatever happens. These are peaceful rallies. We're only going to take up the right lane on the interstate, and we're going to have our flags flying high with Right for the Constitution memorabilia on it. Anything like that to wake up the other people that don't know what's going on. They can at least go and educate themselves of what is going on. People have to get out of their sleepwalk because America is calling on her patriots to save her, because that's really what it is. When they come back from their shutdown, government shutdown, Obamacare is going to be the law of the land, and it's the most unconstitutional law ever written in history. So people, you can log on to it and go read it. I've got past 800 pages. I got tired. It's 3,200 pages long. Every parent out there, if you go to page 110, you'll be praying to God. I'm telling you, because they're going to come for your children, and you need to go read it. Page 110, CPS. The government owns your children. You don't even own them. So you need to wake up and get out there and educate yourself of what is going on, because don't wait for your neighbor, or don't wait for anybody else to do it. Get actively, and this is peaceful. We have to do it now while we can do it peacefully. There's going to come a time very soon where it won't be done peacefully. We have to do it now and stop it.
Okay, real quick, Zeeta, I've already linked to the Facebook page for the Ride to Restore the Constitution. Is there another main website that people should be looking at?
Yes, they can go to ridefortheconstitution.org. We also have a radio show at 9 o'clock, Ride for the Constitution show. Now, starting to actually tonight, it'll be 24-hour coverage until Sunday. And
taking shots at your dome just like
I'm sorry, that was my fault. I was going.
Oh no, that's okay.
Yeah, I was going to your.
It'll be simulcast, and there's RT. There's a lot of news people there on that simulcast for updates coming in, streaming live. There'll be interviews with truck drivers. Larry Clayton will be there. He's the attorney on this with the citizens indictment. It's very exciting what is going on, and just get out there and participate. And if you can't do it, if you're a handicapped person or anybody else, you have to. Let me explain something to you on this boycott, not spending the dollar, how important it is for 3 days. If 50% of the American people did not spend 1 penny circulating that dollar, it will affect the establishment $10 to $15 billion. That's how you get their attention. They've been in our wallet for so long. It's time to get in their wallet and stop them.
All right. Well, I've just linked to the ridefortheconstitution.org. I'm looking at the player for the radio show. I'm seeing the archive of your previous radio shows, and I'm going to keep this prominently displayed at my own website.
Oh, thank you.
I know that you're very busy here, and I know you're on the road right now. So we're going to put a lot of focus on this, certainly during tomorrow's show and at our website over the weekend, because this is a chance for every American to stand up and be visible, not just to your fellow Americans, but to everybody around the world, to just absolutely say we will not be collectively demonized for the crimes of a tiny, tiny number of people in Washington, D.C. and Wall Street. And being visible is so important right now. I cannot underestimate. And all of this is covered by the First Amendment.
Right. You're absolutely right. And the world is involved in this. We have BBC News, we have RT News, we have Japan, and all these reporters are going to be...
But none of the networks. Zeeta, I got to let you go. We're on a commercial break, and we're at the end of our show. Thank you very much. Good luck. Keep on trucking. We'll be right back. Aloha, America, and that, of course, was Zeeta Andrews about the truckers' ride for the Constitution. And, you know, from the point of view of the government and the corporate media, they have got a very, very difficult task. How do you demonize Americans who support the Constitution and the Bill of Rights? How do you portray them as villains to your mass market audience? That's a real hard thing to do. I mean, we were all basically raised and propagandized in the school that the foundation of this nation is that Constitution and is that Bill of Rights. And now we see a government that is flagrantly disregarding the Bill of Rights. And when Americans stand up and say, no, that's not the agreement under which we allow you to manage our nation, now they're trying to figure out a way to say, oh, no, that Bill of Rights, how dare you? And remember, a couple of years ago, the FBI actually sent out flyers to police departments saying that people who talk about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights should be put on the terrorist watch list. We were talking last week about this school that had these 6th graders were given an assignment to rewrite the Bill of Rights to bring it into compliance with the USA Patriot Act and the National Defense Authorization Act. They're stealing our national heritage right before us. And when we stand up and say, no, you don't get to do that, they're, oh, you're an American, you're unpatriotic, you're a terrorist lover, you're an anti-Semite. We've even heard that one out there. And that's what this truckers' ride for the Constitution is really all about, the Constitution. And it absolutely is time for Americans to stand up and say, this far and no farther shall ye come. In terms of those in the government who have arrogated to themselves this exalted status of being above the law. No, you're not. This nation was founded on the principle that everybody up to and including the President of the United States follow the same set of laws. There is not one law for the masses and a second law for the nobility. That's feudalism. That's serfdom. We reject that. We rejected it when we kicked out British rule along with that private central bank, the Bank of England. So get out there and show your support. Local street corner, sign in the back of your car as long as it's not blocking the view, because the cops will ticket you. But now's the time to be visible. I know there's some people out there saying, oh, you can show solidarity by staying at home. Well, I agree that the idea of not spending any money over the next 3 days is going to send a message. Because those retailers will be whining and crying about that. In fact, you might walk into the retailer and say, I had come down here to buy a new flashlight, but I'm not going to do it because I'm showing support for the truckers' ride for the Constitution. Hammer the message home, because if you just stay at home, and I know some people are suggesting that, the retailers don't know if you're staying home in protest, if you're staying home in support of the ride for the Constitution, or if you're staying home because, like so many Americans, you just flat out don't have any more money. So you need to get out there and you need to make noise. Out on your local street corner, on your social media. If you do nothing else, get out on Facebook and Twitter and simply post, I support the truckers' ride for the Constitution. Everywhere, repeating it all weekend long. Now, I know this central government isn't listening to the people. But this is an opportunity for we, the people of the United States of America, to send a message to the rest of the world. To get that message out there. We don't support this government's warmongering. We don't support this fiscal policy of robbing the poor to give to the rich. We, the people of the United States of America, know this government lied about Saddam's nuclear weapons, about Assad's gas, about Iran's nuclear weapons. We don't believe this government. Why should you? It is vitally important that you do something over this weekend to get the message out, even if it's just emailing your list of friends. And we've got the link to their official website, up at whatreallyhappened.com, where you can go and listen to the 24/7 radio show coverage of what's going on. We've also linked their Facebook page. Go in there and hit that like button and share it with your friends and family. This is a call to Rivero's Rangers, a call to keyboards, to get that message out in the face of a government and an American corporate media that absolutely does not want this story to go anywhere. But you heard Zeeta. They got BBCs in there covering this thing. The foreign media is coming to cover this thing. This is going to be big news all over the world, except, of course, on ABC, NBC, CNN, PBS, Fox. They're going to be going on about gadgets to help you take naps successfully, which is what Fox News was running earlier today. Now's the time to make noise. Now's the time to be visible. We need to get out there because it's our country, and it's our Constitution, and it's our Bill of Rights, and we do not consent to have those rights removed from us by theft and stealth. Because they are rights, they cannot be taken away. The Bill of Rights does not grant rights, and the government doesn't have a right to rescind them. The Bill of Rights recognized and acknowledged already existing rights that are connected to us being people, human beings. The government can't simply say and arrogate to itself, well, we've decided we're going to change the rights. They don't get to do that. Because a right that can be taken away is never a right. It's merely a privilege bestowed on a particularly obedient slave by a generous master. And that is not the model for the United States of America. We have seen this government lie to us, play dirty tricks on us, attack our servers, threaten our persons. Now they put out this hoax story about how the National Guard is going to shut down the Beltway. That turned out to be a complete fraud. How much longer are you going to sit there and be lied to by the government and the corporate media before you are angry enough to stand up and say enough is enough? And this weekend is your opportunity to vent that anger and rage. Screw anger management. I am ticked off. That should be your attitude. We as a species evolved the ability to feel rage and anger as a necessary survival mechanism so that when we are being attacked by anybody or any entity, that rage and anger fuels and powers the ability to do what must be done. And this weekend, what must be done is to get out there and be seen and heard. Online, in the real world, everywhere. Make as much noise as you can. Because with the international press covering this, if it's a big enough splash, and it's sure looking like it's going to be, I mean, truckers coming down from Alaska? Probably Hawaii's the only state not being represented there, because you can't drive from Hawaii to the mainland United States. Drive a quarter mile, come up for air. Drive a quarter mile, come up for air. But this is national. This is nationwide. And if it works, the American media is going to be forced to acknowledge it. And they're going to be very hard-pressed to try and portray Americans standing up for the founding principles of this nation in a bad light. Because we are doing what the politicians and the president swear an oath they'll do. Preserve and protect the Constitution of the United States of America from all enemies, both foreign and domestic. And that's what this is about. They talk the talk. We're walking the walk. That's what we're doing out here. It's our Constitution and our country and our Bill of Rights, and we are going to assert our ownership. And anybody in Washington, D.C. or Wall Street who doesn't like it, there's an easy solution. Quit. Walk away. Resign. Abdicate. Whatever you want to call it. Get out. Because you're not doing the job we agreed to let you do. Just lining your own pockets there. Alrighty, so we're coming up on the end of the show. And if I'm pounding on my soapbox, it's because this is important. This may be our last opportunity to peacefully convince this government to change its course of action. And again, I absolutely guarantee you already the U.S. government has got planted agent provocateurs who are going to try and turn this thing violent. Don't fall for it. And if there's a big bang, Just presume the government did it and not the American people. We'll be back tomorrow, Friday, here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay skeptical, stay angry, stay informed, make good choices, fight for your Constitution and Bill of Rights because it is your Constitution and your Bill of Rights. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.